Well, I'm here today with Kelly JANKE, Senior Litigation Consultant of MAGNA Legal Services. Kelly, thank you for joining us, and also thank you to MAGNA for doing this online mock trial for us, both so we could see the attitudes of the jurors as well as what the process is. Now, in terms of the online mock juries, what is generally the purpose that you do these in cases that are real cases as opposed to a hypothetical case that we had here today?
Sure. Yeah. And thanks for having me, Doug. The purpose of conducting the jury research, the mock trial, if you will, is to gain valuable insight into the strengths and the weaknesses of your case from the perspective of the ultimate decision makers, the jurors. So sometimes, the trial team may have lived with a case for a long time, months, maybe even years, maybe even 10 years in some cases. And I think it's natural to get a bit of tunnel vision when it comes to evaluating the case. I think we're probably all guilty of that. And so when the case is presented to jurors, we almost always discover issues that we had not recognized previously, or we learn that they're placing a lot more importance on particular evidence than we had anticipated, and maybe even caring little about other issues that we thought were quite important, for example. So it's a very valuable tool in assessing how jurors see our case. It's also extremely effective in evaluating witnesses. Ultimately, the purpose of the mock exercise is to help us understand how jurors weave all of the evidence and arguments we've presented to them into a story, what matters to them, and how they make their ultimate decision on the verdict form. And this really helps the trial team prepare their case themes, their case narrative in a way that's going to resonate with the jurors in that particular venue. Now, it's also really effective at helping the team determine what direction to take the case. Now, certainly there's a caveat here. The verdict results are not necessarily predictive, but it can certainly help the trial team be more confident in evaluating the level of exposure or the likelihood of success at trial. It helps the team move forward, I think, I would say, in a more strategic approach to simplify the case down into what matters most. And this can also be really useful at getting everyone on board on the same page about what the key issues are in the case. What is the level of risk from the juror's perspective?
I asked Kelly to explain how, in real cases, they select the jurors to make up this mock jury.
It is. The results are very much dependent on the jurors in that specific venue. As you know, jurors in New York City may see a case very differently than jurors in, some rural part of Texas. And so we always have to take that into account to make sure we're telling our story, we're putting our case in front of the right people. And so one of the things that we do at MAGNA is we have a very extensive recruitment process. So first of all, as I said, we want to make sure that we're recruiting our jurors from the actual trial venue. Now, there are circumstances in which we may use a surrogate venue. Maybe you have a very small population in your particular venue and you're a little bit worried about confidentiality or other issues. So we work to help find you a surrogate venue, essentially jurors that have a similar profile of those in your actual trial venue. But in most cases, I would say we're almost always in the actual trial venue. And so the first step we do is we conduct an analysis to determine, well, what is the demographic makeup of a typical jury in that venue? What are those demographics that are going to be representative in the box? How many are likely to have a bachelor's degree, for example? What percentage are likely to be of a certain ethnicity? So these are all things that we're taking into consideration during our recruitment. As well, we have to make sure that, due care is given to make sure that none of our mock jurors know of or have any affiliation with any of the parties. As well, we don't want any jurors in our mock exercise that would be struck for cause, that are not likely to be sitting in the jury box anyway. So there's a lot of care and work that goes into recruiting and screening the mock jurors to make sure that we've got the right people in our exercise to give you the most valuable and accurate data.
One of the ones we did in a trial I had about a year ago, a couple of those things came to light. Number one, it was a small jurisdiction, so we found another jurisdiction, an adjoining county with the same pretty much the same demographic makeup and work with you in doing that. And then the other part was, while this wasn't a situation where we got values or did jurors from New York City, we found a lot of those folks moved to that rural jurisdiction. And so we knew who not to put on that jury.
Yeah.
And it was crucial in terms of the pretrial research we did in terms of the background of potential jurors once we got the jury list on that. So it was a crucial element in terms of that. What we'll do, Kelly, is we'll go through, I'll show the folks the trial, what we came up with, and then we'll come back afterwards, just like you would when you and I work together on a trial, and get your analysis and your thoughts in terms of what your takeaways are and what we should do with them afterwards.
Sure.
We presented to the focus group a hypothetical situation. To them, it was a real accident. Rear end accident, 2 people killed, parents of 3 children who were orphaned as a result of the accident. The company was a hypothetical company that is along the lines of many companies that we find in the trucking industry. They had 85 units, and they had 1 person for their safety department, the safety director. The company, in addition to monitoring hours of service on the ELDs, also monitored overspeeds, more than 10 miles an hour over the speed limit, and hard brakes. This information, while it was reported in real time to the company, was only provided to the safety director every 7 days in the form of a report. Violators were subject to a progressive discipline program. 4 more violations within a 30-day period subjected them to discipline. The first offense, a written warning. Second, resulted in coaching. Third, a day off. Fourth, a week off. The 5th violation, potential termination. Overall, company performance was 42% of the drivers had at least 1 overspeed violation, and 56% of the drivers had at least 1 hard brake transgression. Mr. Peterson, the driver who was involved in the accident, well, he had already had 2 hard brake write-ups, 3 overspeed write-ups. In addition to that, in the 30 days prior to the accident, he had 6 hard brake violations, 4 overspeed violations, 1 of which was a violation of 82 miles an hour. Well, those were the facts presented to the jury. And what you're going to see is it'll open up with, as they do in these proceedings, as if they're going into a jury room. And we have 2 panels of jurors. We've cut back and forth from one to the other, and we've edited this down for the sake of time because this went over several hours for each group. But what we're looking to is to give you the idea of what these perceptions were and the general tone of their reaction to these facts. In addition, what you'll see is the jurors initially expressing their opinions without looking at the verdict slip, and then they'll start to work on the verdict after that. I think the key thing that I wanted to get across is to take a look and listen to what their reactions to these circumstances are, and the takeaways from being able to eavesdrop into the jury room in a case like this.
But the fact that they didn't monitor him the way they were supposed to, or stop him because of violations, like tell him to take a week off or something like that, I think that is very negligent on their part.
You know, there was no consequences for his actions in his driving with Mexican trucking.
The monitoring, the speeding, a couple of times he should have been monitoring.
Yeah, how you doing? Yeah, it's hands down. The trucking company is negligent because they didn't have hands on, and I think further charges should be brought against the trucking company.
Lexington Trucking was negligent. Mr. Peterson was negligent. And I also think that they should be awarded punitive damage.
I feel that there were many opportunities missed, and his past behavior indicated such that he had an issue with hard braking, late braking, the exact reason that the accident occurred in this case.
I think there were definitely missed opportunities on the company's part to look at some of the concerns that this driver and the behaviors that this driver had with the hard braking and the speeding, and that there were missed opportunities to remedy that, and that they had the data and alerts to show that they just did not act on it.
But yes, I do think that the company was negligent in not giving him his reprimands in his hard braking. You know, they're trying to say, well, he just had 2 speeding tickets, and it wasn't that bad, and it felt like it was very downplayed. It's inexcusable. I mean, the amount of write-ups that it took, the oversight, I mean, it was clearly negligent, so I really feel that the family deserves compensation. I'll go down to the supervision section now. I feel like we're going to have some some different feelings here. Do we think that they were negligent in his supervision? Personally, I have to go, like, because 5 and 6 are kind of like, you know, together. Yes, I think they were incredibly negligent in the supervision. I mean, we've seen his rap sheet, his write-ups, you know, the infractions he had, all of those things, and, I mean, the guy barely got a slap on the wrist from multiple, you know, kind of screw-ups, and I don't think anything was really done about that. This is playing with people's lives. You know, you got heavy road there, and they travel at very high speeds, and even if they're not going very fast, they can still do a lot of damage. So he had a lot of infractions. They may not have been the same one, but he should have been told, okay, look, you got to work on this stuff, and we're going to, you know, take you out for a day, or we're going to take you out for a week because you've done this many. And knowing that there was repercussions, you know? I think it's also the holding him accountable for the fact that not only was it just the infractions, like how he had to have so many to get a write-up, he did have write-ups too, which meant that it's like exponential. It's like, oh, so you messed up on this so many times.
And I would agree with yes to both. I drive 322 every day to work, and I know kind of what goes on there, and the fact that this happened 6 times in the 30 days before the accident said that this was his normal behavior.
Oh, sorry. His prior driving behavior showed that he drove like that on a regular basis, and that, you know, something like this was bound to happen, and the company knew about that and failed to act on that.
The electronics showed that there were issues with the hard braking and speeding at some point, and so I say there was some negligent supervision. So I say yes.
Yeah. Supervision? What supervision? They didn't do any supervision. Information was coming in, but you know they was doing that more for show. That information supposed to be, you know, digested, and certain things were supposed to come back. You know, they didn't even supervise them with the information they was getting. So, like I said, they're guilty.
They only have one monitor. And whether this monitor working 24 hours, because they be out on the road 24 hours, you know what I mean? What could that person supervise and monitor, you know, if they, I mean, they work in 6-8 hours? There's no consistency on that, you know what I mean? And they're cutting corners, and that all goes into play. I'm done.
I agree with Keith. I think they are negligent. They had one person that looked at this information once a week, which is ridiculous. It should be checked every day, constantly. They have all these checks in place, but there's nobody to monitor it. They're totally at fault. They need to have more supervision, and they just put it up as show.
They were extremely negligent in supervision, Mr. Peterson. They had those programs monitoring him, but if they only have one person monitoring these screens, and barely even, for 85 people, across the board, there's so much things like balls falling through.
Well, that gives you a sense of the initial deliberations, and the jury found that there was negligence in the supervision. After that, they moved on to the question of punitive damages.
I'm going to go around the table, and I want to get a sense from each of you if you feel that punitive damages are warranted for any of these three categories. Vivian, I'll start with you. What do you think?
I think punitive damages should be awarded for training and supervision, but not hiring.
Okay. Does it rise to the level of punitive damages, though? Is it
Yes.
wanton, willful
Yes.
to you?
Yes.
Okay.
The one that really jumps out at me is the supervision. And definitely they should be awarded punitive damages for the supervision or lack thereof.
Punitive and compensatory, because the other drivers, I think they should be checked out too, because you may have another situation that comes up like that. What's with the other drivers? You know, you may have another accident, you know, and they need more supervision.
I think that the kids, the orphans that have been made out of this tragedy deserve all the damages and punitive damages that they can possibly get. This company, Cuts Corners, doesn't value its employees and the well-being of the general public. They send out people that are not properly trained, that have lied on their resumes. They need to take this. Maybe they'll pay out these damages and then take this as a good deep encouragement to start reinvesting in the people and their staff and the safety of the world around them. And maybe things will change. They need to pay out.
Yes, I think they should be punished in all categories.
I think they should have total punitive damages. Like Grace, I would hope that they'd rethink the way they do business, which is questionable, but paying out all this money may make them think a little bit differently about the way they do things.
Well, both panels awarded punitive damages as to the supervision aspect. And one of the things that are of most value from these exercises is to find out the why, the individuals. So they go through and start to talk about this with the potential jurors or the mock jurors. Apologies, some of this is a little difficult to pick up, but I wanted to give you the sense of what they had to say.
Right, the phrase that jumped out at me was reckless indifference. And so, to me, that's the phrase that jumps out that says that this is outrageous because it's the word origin, meaning that it's one of those, not all of them. And so reckless indifference would suggest to me that when you look at a guy who has all of these violations and is still doing them, and then coupled with the statement that the company just didn't have time or the staffing to properly supervise this, it tells me that they knew there was an issue and went to it, and that recklessness unfortunately cost lives.
I agree with Daniel. I feel that it's the company that they knew they had a problem. They didn't they didn't reprimand him to the point to where he knew that there would be consequences for what he does. So, he wasn't particularly, I guess, worried about doing these things.
I think that phrase, reckless indifference, was the key phrase for me in the sense of they knew about his driving behaviors, but they just didn't address them and act on them appropriately, which holds them liable for his behaviors.
Kind of just echoing what's already been said by the group, but also the part that really stood out, and I think I did catch it correctly, is that they had admitted to the fact that, due to having so few employees, that they weren't able to adequately control the situation with the supervision. It's almost like you knew you had the information, you chose to do minimal with it, and then you never followed through on it, and you admitted to that fact. That's the reason.
because of the fact that it was very, very clearly, not only did these two people lose their lives, so we have to look at it from, the angle of, like, these are two people, like, there's orphans now because of the negligence caused by this company. It's also the fact that, there is a very clear kind of evidence and history of them kind of turning the other cheek with some, red flag behaviors. And because they were negligent in that way, they're, like, people, like, legit died. So that's where it rose to the level of, like, they deserve compensation because they were wrong. Like, the family was wrong so greatly. Like, they were left two children parentless. So that's kind of, I know it's kind of a simple metric for me, but it was a life or death issue.
So for you all, it's really whether they're monitoring it once every 7 days, that's not enough for you all. Is that right?
No.
No.
Right. No.
Not now.
How often does it need to be done? Does there need to be more people? What are your thoughts on this?
Daily and more
Daily.
Right.
Daily.
Daily.
One safety monitor for 85 drivers is just not sufficient.
No, it's ridiculous.
No, not at all.
It's not. It's
Not
not.
enough.
I think this company should be taken over by a state agency or a federal agency to make sure that they're doing the right thing.
Yeah, I'd do that. Yeah, definitely.
What was lacking was a change in actual behavior. The outcome didn't change.
One of the questions we followed up with them is if they had a thought in terms of if you're going to monitor for either speeding or hard braking, which one would they say in their mind was the most important?
I think speeding is hard event, because if you didn't speed, then you wouldn't have an issue.
Hard braking. Speeding is one thing, but if the speeding comes with hard braking, because if you hard brake, your truck can jackknife. I'm thinking the hard braking.
I'm thinking that they kind of both work together, but the speeding leads to the hard braking. The speeding, if the speed is in control, the hard braking would be in control, as the way I see it.
Hard braking is scarier to me than speeding. Like, people speed or go over, 10 miles over the speed limit sometimes. It's not, ideal or great, but it's the reality of the world. I know that if I'm on the highway and I found myself having to slam on the brakes, that is a, 10 times scarier situation than, accidentally, I know it's because of speeding, but usually I don't know, it speaks to, me being distracted more than it does, me speeding.
Yes, I think both of them are bad. And also, the definition that I understood about hard braking is when they're behind someone, they're too close to them, if I understood it right. And that's just as bad as speeding. I mean, both of those can lead up into accidents. So yes, I think both of them are. They're not. One is not better than or more worse than the other. I believe. I think both of them are about the same.
Yes, I do. For me, it was the hard braking because the truck failed to stop in time, so it impacted the car. He was going 9 miles an hour over the posted speed limit. I think that's not terribly unreasonable. It's a little high, but it didn't exceed the company's 10. So, there were a few overspeed violations, but the hard braking indicates that he's having difficulty stopping, and it's a regular occurrence. We see 6 times in the previous 30 days.
So for me, I think it was, it's hard to say which infraction was worse, because I feel like they kind of go hand in hand. And I think the fact that, not only just a hard brake, because if you're in a sedan or a hatchback, I personally drive a hatchback, a tiny car, every single time, I'm trying to turn into my own housing development now, I just have this kind of sense of fear wash over me, whenever I see an 18-wheeler behind me, because you think about not only the braking, but are they even paying attention to the light? Are they coming up, like a bat out of hell behind you?
For me, I think it's kind of along the same lines. There's a pattern with the braking, hard braking, late braking, which is the exact same situation in which the accident occurred. And there's a pattern of behavior that's established that the employer clearly could see, but had done nothing really to correct that. And the corrective actions they did take resulted in the behavior continuing.
I don't think that there's one that's more problematic than the other. I agree with Jonathan. I think there's a pattern there, and I think that both of those behaviors, the speeding and the late braking, hard braking, can be equally as dangerous and have a level of risk there that are going to put others in danger.
Speed, honestly, just because at that point you can kind of aggregate. If they're blazing down the road like that, that gives you a good idea that they're doing other things. So I feel like speed would be really imperative.
For me, I think the hard brake, again, it goes back to what I've been saying all along, that it shows that that was a near accident. And the reality is, speed doesn't bother me quite as much because, if you're on an open stretch of highway where you can see for 6 miles and you're 15 miles an hour the speed limit, that's a very different situation than you're driving too fast in the same circumstance going around a corner in a known congested area. The speed, just the sheer magnitude shows the same thing, but the need to hard brake would be completely different there. So for me, if I had to choose one, it would be the hard braking data because it shows me that the driver's trying to avoid an accident.
I think the hard brake data, to me, would be most significant, especially in this situation. I agree, when there's stretches of highway, trucks might pick up speed and things like that, although, before you know it, there's traffic and things like that.
So we asked the jurors, what are your expectations with regard to a safety program by a trucking company?
More employees doing supervision of the drivers, checking what they're how they're driving and what they're doing.
Absolutely. I think discipline policy should have meaningful outcomes. And so if you're triggering the discipline because there are set number of violations, you would expect then not to escalate to the next level. That's what I think it should look like.
But an ideal supervision program, to me, would include something that's documented by the employer as far as follow-up, and then that there is a continuation of kind of follow-through, that if an employee continues to have, X number of issues, X number of problems, these are the steps that we then continue to take and then document that up into a point where either, there's termination of employment or the employee is, made whole again and there are no violations.
I think that, safety should be one of the paramount focuses of a company. As it pertains to driving behaviors and things like that. I would expect if there were concerns that were noticed in the technology that company had accessible to them, that if they had concerns about a driver, they should be addressing that with the driver. They should look at any additional training needed or a plan of action for more stringent monitoring. And I think an employee should be made aware of any repercussions if there aren't improvements made, and that there is potential for termination if necessary.
Kind of along the same lines, the lack of change in behavior, but the lack of any action to change the behavior. So you could see that the same reprimand was causing the same or producing the same result, which means they just went through the motions, stopped, and didn't continue any further.
I would agree. I think that they had data to show that there were concerns there. They just weren't acting on it appropriately. I know he got write-ups, but what did they then put in place to address those concerns?
I agree. I mean, the company, like I said, I think they need to, if they see a problem, they need to fix it. And they saw a problem, but they didn't. And now it's going to cause them to have to fix it.
We also raised the fact that, this is a company of limited size, limited resources. The jury's reaction?
Okay.
Well, they say that they're a small company, but if they can't run
They're
the
not
company
small.
the way it should be, they shouldn't be in business.
Exactly.
I don't consider them small. 85 truck drivers? No, that's not small.
They're saying
Yeah,
they're small. Their defendants
in
said
court
they
they're
were a
saying
small
that.
company. Yeah,
They're saying that so that we view them differently.
right.
But I don't think that, no, like how long have they been in business? I highly doubt if you have 85 drivers that you've been in business for a short period of time to not have all this supervision and training up to date, like that you're on top of all your employees and you know what's going on in your company.
I'm going to say that did not play into my decision at all.
This is Rachel. That didn't factor in at all either.
No.
This is
Go ahead,
Danielle.
Dan.
No, I agree. As I say, I know the defendant made a point, even though that they were small in size, they actually had invested a lot of money into like monitoring tools within their trucks. So to me, even though they might not have had a lot of numbers in their company, they still were using their money in such a way that they had methods to track things. They didn't make note of the fact that there wasn't like a lack of employees able to monitor these things. It didn't seem to be a priority when they actually had the tools to get the data. They just weren't monitoring the data.
I think every company that faces the public has a responsibility to take the safety of the public at their top concern, regardless of their size, whether they're 1 employee or 10,000 employees. So the fact that there are 127, the evidence would suggest that they didn't have enough staff to monitor the data they were collecting and to sufficiently discipline the drivers and reteach them in such a way that it changed the behavior. And so I think whether it was a small, mid-sized, large company, I think it doesn't really matter because we all have a responsibility to operate companies in a way that they're operated safely.
One of the jurors raised a consideration in terms of whether or not the driver was using his cell phone at the time, and goes on in terms of his consideration of that. I think the takeaway here is, and we talk about it in another section of this seminar, is that sometimes we need to put out there the negative, be it the logs, the cell phone usage, etc., as opposed to leaving a vacuum for the jurors to fill in with their own assumptions.
One data point that I would love to see here would be cell phone usage. Was he using his cell phone at the time of the accident? It's not here. It's not part of the discussion. But in driving on 322 and driving on 83 and 81 and 1115, these other roads that are in the same area as the accident, like I see this all the time, people that are using their cell phones and then they're hard braking to avoid accidents. So that's where my mind jumps to right away. But the fact that this is an ongoing pattern, like this is what speaks to me to negligent supervision. Like the data clearly shows this guy was engaging in near accidents on a regular basis. And so like that's where the concern is for me. I would love to see the data point of cell phone usage because then that would probably shift the negligence away from the company and to the driver, because if they're doing these things that they at least say they're supervising and providing punishment and re-instruction. But if he was on a cell phone, like no company can control distracted driving at that instant. Yes, you can offer reinforcement for better driving, but you can't change that moment.
And the question of cameras came up. And there were some interesting insights in terms of the expectations or the experience of cameras in transportation.
Onboard cameras.
Okay, so why do you say onboard cameras? And what would that do?
Mm-hmm. It would, number one, if it's onboard, it takes a picture of what's going on with the driver as far as was he distracted, what happened, it would give us more of a visual aspect of the accident. And there are cameras that can be located on the outside of the vehicles that can, actually say, well, wait a minute, he got cut off by this person, or that person behind him just was acting really crazy, or, It would give us more of a visual aspect of an accident. Like I said, I ride public bus. They have cameras on the buses. They have to have them because if something happens and I'm not locked down, they're liable. So, just like the question Daniel asked, was the driver on his cell phone? Well, we don't know because he's not going to tell you. And a camera and the inboard, it's only going to keep people honest. And like they say, if you're honest anyways, what do you need a camera for? Well, obviously we're humans, and we need some sort of there's a camera on me, now I have to be accountable.
Okay. If you're given a choice between data on hard brakes, overspeed, or the cameras, which one would you choose?
If I had to choose one, I would choose the cameras because even though it costs the company another added expense, there's somebody sitting behind a desk that's not doing anything anyways. But it would cause the driver to think twice about his hard braking and his speed. They've already got the speed and the hard braking technology right now. Some truckers have the cameras. But I think the cameras for a trucking company would be very beneficial.
I honestly, with the way technology is now, I feel like dash cams, not even just for truckers, I feel like for everybody, are really pertinent tools. And in the case of most dash cams that people can get, aftermarket, they only really record instances where there is, a hard brake or a sudden speed change or, a manual kind of push like that, but they're recording constantly. I just don't see why, if you're driving for a living, we expect other people in other professions to be surveilled. Why shouldn't truck drivers?
And, I think that would be one step in the right direction. I just kind of question why it couldn't be continuously recording. You would be able to know other information that led up to it instead of just when the hard brake happened, because there could be accidents where there was no hard brake. It was just a hard stop. So I feel like you might just take that one step further and just get it continuously recording.
Well, with all the technology that we have today, I don't understand why we can't get somebody to develop maybe all three in one. That would be something that would be beneficial to a lot of, not just trucking companies, but a lot of companies, to find out what their drivers are doing and what's causing these accidents. Because if it is neglect or tired drivers or, whatever the circumstances is, we need some way to find out what's going on and how to fix it.
Okay, Kelly, we're back, and the audience got to see and hear what the jurors thought, got to look in there. One of the things, just on a procedural note, is the first thing in the process is to let the jurors just kind of do a general discussion before they deliberate. And I take it that is pretty much attuned to what jurors do in the jury room itself, to discuss it before they sit down and go through the questions.
Yeah, oftentimes they just like to hash out the issues and get a sense of, where do we all stand on this case before they even pick up the verdict slip. And oftentimes you'll see some camps forming, plaintiff or defense, before they even pick up the verdict form as well. So they definitely will spend a fair amount of time doing that. And that's something that we try to simulate as well in our exercise to make sure that everybody in the deliberation panel gets a chance to be heard, get their voice out at the start, so that no one gets left behind in the process.
All right. Facts of this case, the jury deliberations, the takeaways. What'd you come up with, Kelly?
Yeah, so the jury in this particular exercise, they were quite critical of the defendant's safety policies and procedures, specifically the monitoring and supervising of their drivers. And one of the things that I noticed listening to the deliberations was, yes, it was a sympathetic plaintiff, but I think the more important emotion that I identified there was some anger and some hostility towards the defendant. And as we heard the deliberations go on, the more the anger and hostility gets ratcheted up by those pro-plaintiff jurors, the higher the damages go and the stronger their desire to punish.
Yeah. You know, we had the discussion with Rachel in terms of the background of the nuclear verdicts and the reptile theory. Anger seems to be the key detonator, the common denominator in all those.
And I think, I'm sorry, go ahead.
No, go ahead.
No, I think it is. And I think if you couple a very sympathetic plaintiff with anger, that's really your worst case scenario in terms of the ultimate number on the verdict form.
If this had been a real case, you had been presented it, what are your thoughts in terms of what do we do?
Yeah, I mean, from the defense perspective, I think what jurors felt was lacking was really a story they could grab onto from the defense perspective. They had a lot of facts about what was done or not done in terms of the monitoring and supervision, but they didn't really have an overall theme or narrative that they, I think, could latch onto here. And a lot of it is also filling in the gaps. So they have a lot of questions about, the monitoring, as well as suggesting some very, I would say, unreasonable and impractical solutions to the problems that they identified in the monitoring and supervision. So part of it is resetting or reframing those expectations into what is what is normal in the industry and bringing it down and putting some context in it so that we don't have jurors that start increasing the level or the expectation of what this company should have done.
Well, one of the other things that was not in this case that we're talking about elsewhere in the sessions are humanizing both the individual and the company. And, I thought that might have been something that may have improved or potentially helped the case as we went through it.
Definitely. Putting a face to the company and one that's well received is very important. And that's one of the things that we often do in these mock exercises is play some clips of the 30B6 witness, some safety director, something that's going to be key in jurors' minds to make sure that that witness is coming across as effective as we need them to. Ideally, the witness is advancing the overall themes of the defense and also helping us tell our story.
Well, I hope you found that insight of jurors useful in terms of the data and the issues it presents today. Not just the data that you have, but how you use it, how you analyze it, and the discipline used to conform driver behavior to avoid the accidents of this nature. Now, we have a lot of material, and we have another session coming up where we took the various perceptions of the jurors, not just on the facts of the case, we talked about that here, but these other perceptions are just the general facts, and we talked to Rachel York-Colangelo about those facts, how they play into the jury's perception, and what they bring to the courtroom. Again, thank you for joining us.